Matt,
Yes.
while we're waiting, would it be appropriate for me to introduce the incoming Director of Finance and Risk Management?
Oh my goodness. I would say so.
Okay, we have Art Curon on with us. Art started Monday, and he will take over when I retire the end of January, but Art will be with us for the next I will be with Art for the next basic 6 weeks. So we're introducing him to everybody. Art, if you would like to give the committee a little bit of your background, I think that would be great. And then you guys could introduce yourselves, Matt, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Yes. Welcome,
Right.
Art.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody. I'm not sure of the agenda, so I'll try and be extremely brief here. But as Ellen mentioned, my name is Art Guadon. I am the incoming Finance and Risk Management Director for Pima County. Ellen stated I started Monday, and it's been sort of baptism by fire here. She's not been afraid to throw me in pretty much any meeting that's on our calendar, so I definitely appreciate that. A little bit of background about me. I'm Tucson native, so I was born and raised here. I have about a little over 17 years experience in municipal government, dating back to 2007, where I began my government career for the town of Willow Valley. I worked there until 2012. I moved over to the city, handled the various tasks such as debt management, banking and investments, pension and deferred comp, risk management, benefits administration. So I did that until my last day at the city was 12/6 before transitioning over to the county. So I'm excited to be part of the county team. Excited to meet you all and listen and enjoy the conversation today. And appreciate the time that you've allotted.
Wonderful. Welcome. Your name is familiar to me. It probably from the Tucson city of Tucson days, but certainly glad to have a local guy involved in this. And I don't know. Has it been hard to make the transition from city to county? That's a tough fence to get over sometimes.
Not so far. I think that because of my local government experience, the transition will probably be easier than most. And maybe the names might sound familiar because I have a family that has spanned local government for a number of years. My dad was the finance director for the town of Marana for many years. He spent some time the City of Tucson Transportation Department as their finance administrator, and currently is the finance director for the Pima Association of Governments. My brother worked for the county for many years, as did my mom. So the name has been in the family or the government space for quite a while. So that may be where you know the last name. But yeah, the transition has been good so far. Maybe Ellen can maybe chime in a little bit there in terms of what she's seen from the transition. But I don't think the biggest challenge is learning the processes, the different processes and the people, and that the work is going to be probably largely the same, but people and processes are what's different.
Well, great. As Ellen said, we'll give you a brief introduction. I retired from the wastewater department, spent, I guess it was about 8 years there, and worked in the finance arena within wastewater, as well as a number of other administrative and support type areas at the department. Before that, I was with Pima Association of Governments and the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. So that's my more recent background. Claire, speaking of PAG alumna,
yeah.
Tell them about you.
We have a lot of links here, don't we? I'm Claire Zucker. I'm the director of Pima County Cooperative Extension. So it's the unit in the University of Arizona of Cooperative Extension for the county. Before that, I was at the Water Resources Research Center as their associate director. And prior to that, I was at PAG at Pima Association of Governments, most recently as their sustainability director. So yeah, we overlap. So nice to meet
Definitely.
you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you.
And then we also have a wastewater alumna with us, Kirsten.
Hello. Yes, I'm Kirsten Wansvik. I did start out at Pima County Wastewater as an assistant EIT engineer to the then deputy director of treatment. Was there about 3 years, made the jump to continue my engineering career at a firm called Celabar, which was acquired by Stantec circa 2000, 2001, something like that. And then I had a civil engineering consulting career in water. I think of myself more as a wastewater engineer than I do a water engineer, but I do dip my toes in both kinds. So, and I am a principal and the office lead for Stantec's office here in the downtown Tucson area.
And our fourth member has no connection to PAG or wastewater, other than being a fairly recent addition to our committee. Eric, introduce yourself to our new finance department director.
Good afternoon. Joined about a year ago. I have a degree in geology, but have been in sales all of my life. I currently sit as the chair of the Green Valley Domestic Water Improvement District. And so that's kind of the tie-in for me to wastewater. See, I get it to the people and then I watch it leave.
Well, there you have us, and you'll find that we're all quite passionate about the wastewater department and its financial resources, and wanting to maintain the department as one of the leaders in the country as it currently is. And we are all very fond of the director of the wastewater department, and we're glad he's not retiring. And we certainly have grown very fond of Ellen as well, and sorry to see her go, and wish her well, certainly in retirement. And gosh, I guess if there's any open seats on the RAC committee, Ellen, we'd we'd find that very valuable.
Thank you.
Okay,
So
I think we've got our quorum plus one here, and I'll call the meeting to order at 1:13. Roll call, please, Jeanette.
All right, Matt Mathewson,
Here.
Eric Solwold,
Here.
Kirsten Wansvik,
Here.
and Claire Zucker.
Here.
We have a full.
Wonderful. Asia sends her regrets not being able to make this meeting. So remember, please, the virtual meeting requirements operate generally with our microphones muted. If you have interest in speaking, please demonstrate that by raising your hand on the screen through Teams, and unmute your mic when called upon, and then at the end of comments, lower your hand, remute your mic. Audience members, please understand that we have a time at the beginning and end of the meeting for call to the audience, for you to chip in, or if committee members call on you for comment or explanations, we appreciate your participation. Reminder that the meeting is being recorded for open meeting law purposes. And if you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Jeanette. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And do we have a safety share from anyone?
Call to the audience first.
I skipped the call to the audience. Do we have any comments, questions, other input from the audience? And if the audience has a safety share, we'd welcome it now. And anybody else, including Jackson. Well, I was just, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I'll chime in for Jackson. Our safety share at our manager meeting this morning involved traffic safety, driving safety. I think we've all witnessed a variety of accidents coming into work. Several employees shared stories of accidents they've seen while coming into work in the morning, people jogging in dark outfits in the, darker type of atmosphere. So just kind of be careful. And this is the time of year when people are distracted, and traffic and driving is very important to pay attention to.
Great. Thank you, Marla. Really appreciate that. Good points. I'll just mention I was up on a ladder working on a Christmas tree decoration this morning, and probably violated the 3-point contact rule. So I urge all of you, if you find yourself on ladders, either decorating or undecorating, do be careful. Ladder falls can be catastrophic. Okay. And moving on to the approval of the minutes.
So moved.
I will mention before we move to approval, Jeanette, I think we've complimented you before, but it really merits compliments every time with the quality and detail of these minutes. Great job. I did notice one minor item on the second page under the pillars discussion, paragraph 2, the 4th line where you mentioned the Fitch ratings, and in the parenthetical after Fitch, your self-correcting mechanism went into effect and put Finch instead of Fitch. So
Got it. Thank you so much.
okay,
All
you're
corrected.
welcome. Okay, with that very minor correction, I've had a motion from Eric to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Claire. All in favor? Aye.
That was Kirsten.
Very good.
who
Thank you.
Okay.
Seconded.
It's fine.
Kirsten seconded. I wasn't fast enough on my.
Oh, okay.
I was going for it, but I didn't make it.
Try not to
right.
fight over me, guys. It's okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Before we get into the discussion items, I know the meeting was scheduled for 2 hours. Do we have any restraints from anybody on time this afternoon?
If we could take it to 90 minutes, I'd really appreciate it.
Okay, well,
I mean, it didn't seem like that long an agenda, and if we just keep it going, maybe.
right. Okay, that'll be our goal.
This is Jackson. I have to be in Jan Lesher's office at 3 o'clock. So I will bail off a little before that in order to, I'll be back in my office before then, but I need a little time to walk over to her office. So maybe 2:45 probably for me.
Okay, well, we're going to target 2:30 at the latest. Okay, moving into discussion items. First is the continued overview of the white paper, discussing the key financial metrics, our financial pillars. And this meeting was intended to focus on the cash reserve pillar, which goes well with item B on the agenda, which is the draft board policy on that subject. So I think I'd like to hand it to Ellen to begin the discussion or continue the discussion and be able to entertain questions or concerns about cash reserve pillar.
So what you guys had requested at the last meeting, we had gone over some of the items in the pillars, and I believe that the takeaway that I took at any rate was to create a board policy to codify the various reserves and the use of those reserves. So Jeanette sent that out to everybody, and I'm going to share it on my screen. And if you guys can tell me how big I have to make it so that everybody can see it, and then we can walk through it. Is that sufficiently large? It's good for me.
Looks good to me.
I could use it a little bit bigger.
Okay. How's that?
Very good.
All righty. So what we have is a draft policy that Finance has put together in conjunction with Jackson. So Michelle Malinsky was primary, and she is on vacation today, so she is not here. So I am probably going to not do as good a justice as she would, but we're going to walk through this. So as you know from the various discussions we've been having over the last 6 to 9 months on the reserves and the financial pillars, what we've created here is a draft Board of Supervisor policy that will establish a policy for the maintenance and use of reserves for the Wastewater Reclamation Fund, and that this policy outlines the process for reaching and maintaining those targeted cash reserves and their specific uses. So I'm not going to go through the background because that's we've done that repeatedly, although I'm thinking that, well, let's just go through it. The point of the reserves is to secure and maintain the credit rating, to provide sufficient working capital to meet our cash flow needs, to ensure stable and predictable rate structure, and to provide one-time funds for unforeseen expenditures related to emergencies. That is the new piece that was not in our various lexicons, if you will. We had the $20 million reserve for emergencies, and it was pretty much a hands, paws, and claws off, don't touch it. So we have included your suggestion for the ability to be able to utilize those funds if and when there is a true emergency, and we'll get into some of that detail a little bit further. It talks about the reasons why cash reserves are crucial. And then the next paragraph talks about the purchase agreement for the issuance of obligations, which includes a rate covenant requiring the county to establish and maintain rates sufficient to cover at least 120% of the principal and interest. Rating agencies expect 130% or 1.3. In the last meeting that we had, we eliminated any reference per your request to the 120. So I'm thinking that that probably does need to come out of here. I apologize because I didn't catch that. So what I would suggest is that we edit this particular paragraph so that it says to maintain rates sufficient to cover at least 130% of the principal and interest as expected by rating agencies. So that would be the edit that I would like to suggest that we make there. Going on further, to support the stable rate structure, we're talking about limiting debt to between 10 and 15 years. That is in compliance with the county's pay-as-you-go strategy. It's a little more flexible for wastewater. All of the other county departments we're moving to the 10-year or less. But we recognize, as we have discussed previously, some of the extraordinary outlay that is necessary for the facilities for wastewater for it to go up to 15 years. So that's what that terminology is. The definitions are an emergency reserve of 20 million that was established by the board in 2010. operating reserves of 90 days, which currently runs between 23 and 25 million, and that will float as the expenditures within wastewater go up. And then the debt service reserves, which are established as we sell the debt. And those are held by other financial institutions, but we reference them here because it is part of the overall reserve strategy. Moving on to the, so is there any questions about this background or definitions?
Yes, in the operating reserves, the 90 days of expenses, is that stated differently from how the policy has been? I mean, it seems as though there's been a 30 and a 60.
No, it's always been 90 days. 90 days of operating expenses, that ties to cash expenses, so that it does not include depreciation or any of the non-cash transactions. If we want to add a little clarity to that so that it is 90 days of operating cash expenditures, certainly can make an edit to that if you think that that is necessary.
So what I'm looking at and thinking about is the discussion about operating reserve fund in the current year's financial plan, where it talks about it being partially restricted, and then that some debt instruments require a 30-day balance, and then the remaining 60 days then is designated for operating expenses. Is there a need to make that distinction, or
I think with the creation of the new board policy that we would be eliminating all of those distinctions, and we would go with the 90 days of operating expenditures.
And currently those 90 days equate to, you say, about 25 million.
Yeah, what 23 to 25, depending on how much the expenses are.
Okay.
All
And
right.
then these three components together will make up what's considered as our restricted reserves.
Correct.
Okay, carry on.
Eric has his hand up as well.
Oh, very good. Thank you for noticing. Eric?
Okay. Question, and the third item under your definition, debt servicing reserves or debt service reserves. Do any of the current debt that the wastewater department have require them to hold X number of dollars a year's worth of money off to the side and like an escrow account or anything?
Each of the debt issuances that is still outstanding with wastewater, each one of them has a specific reserve requirement that is set up at the issuance of the debt and is managed by our third-party bank that had issued the debt. So yes, each one of them has their own requirement. That cash never came to Pima County. That always lives with the third-party banking institution.
Okay, so is that separated somewhere in the financials for us to show us how much is held by the trustee?
Yes,
of the debt?
it is. And if you need me to identify that in the wastewater financials, happy to do that and send that to Jeanette so she can send it around.
Yeah, I see. The thing that troubles me is, in one case, we're saying that we must have a debt ratio now of 1.3, which gives us a 30% up on top of of the normal operating to cover the debt. And the next thing we have is we have money held by the trustee that is to be used to pay for the debt. And I'm thinking we're kind of doing two things in just a different way, trying to get to the same point. And I think, to me, if we're going to hold money aside for a year to be able to cover the debt for a year, then the 1.3 is almost nonsensical.
The amount that is set aside at the financial institutions, I believe, and I'm going to get this wrong, so I apologize. I believe it is at least 6 months of the debt reserve of the debt payment for that given debt issuance. So each year, a separate reserve is set up for each debt issuance. So each one fluctuates with regard to the debt service, which is why we try to have level set debt service so that we can manage that. They are two different things. One is by the financial institution to ensure that they have money set aside in their accounts where they can have access to them to pay for the interest and the principal on the debt. And the other is on our financial statements to ensure that we have a credit-worthy organization. We don't have any ongoing concern, relationship, or issues. They cover two different and distinct things. So I don't think you could think of them as additive. They are, they're not covering the same things. One is looking at the organization as a whole and its creditworthiness, and the other is a function of paying your debt back.
Okay. And again, the 1.3 is to help us set rates that we charge our customer base. The debt service reserves are there for in case that their department cannot meet its debt service for a period of time, can be covered for at least up to 6 months based upon what's held in reserve. And that reserve is determined by how much the debt is of a particular from a particular financial institution on a certain loan, and that's changes year by year depending on how much is actually outstanding on the loan.
Right.
Okay.
And those are set, those debt service requirements are set when we issue the debt.
Right. Okay. I saw Art had his hand up. I don't know, maybe he had a something to add. I'm not sure.
I noticed that too. Art, comment or question?
Just a comment, but I think Ellen in the conversation covered it, but a lot of the time, the debt service coverage ratio is a requirement that's outlined in the bond indenture. And so that's a requirement that the county must maintain through the bond documents. We make that pledge during the bond document, in the bond offering statement. And so that's why it's good, best practice to maintain that throughout the life of the bond. As Alan indicated, it does maintain that credit rating. And if the county were to dip below that, the rating agency has the potential to, downgrade the debt or change the outlook as far as what it looks like moving forward. So, but that was all I wanted to chime in on.
I appreciate that. And Ellen, correct me if I'm wrong, but Art, that was, I think, what Ellen referred to when she was suggesting we delete that 1.2 bond covenant reference in our our policy that we have actually extended beyond what's in the covenant, the 1.2, added a margin to the 1.3 level to make sure that we don't even come close to violating that covenant. Did I get that right? Close enough to right, Alan?
You did. One of the things that, just historical information, previously, we had gone out for voter authorized debt. So Art is referencing those bond documents. Bond documents dealt with the voter authorized debt. In the late 2000s, we moved to wastewater obligations, no longer requiring the voter authorization to do that. And that's where we started to, we still had outstanding debt under the bond off, which had the requirement of the 120. We have since paid off all of that debt, and now we are only operating with the wastewater obligations. But we had been carrying over that 120 from the bond debt to the 130 with the obligations. This year, with your help, we have finally, I think, gotten to the point of let's remove everything related to the bond authorizations and the 120 covenant and stick with the 1.3 covenant that we've been using for the past number of years. So yes, you got it correct.
And back to Eric.
Ellen, I appreciate the fact that under the operating reserve, you're basing that on our operational expenses, less some of the non-cash things, and that'll fluctuate from year to year. If I'm understanding that correctly. Currently, it's about 25 million right now.
Correct.
Okay. We could almost surmise that that'll continue to move upward as inflation and cost of goods and all keep going up.
Correct. And what I would suggest that as if that reaches a threshold, which it becomes untenable for the committee and or the county to make a recommendation, 90 days is a lot of cash. If we move higher, it would be appropriate in a couple of years to revisit the board policy to see if 90 days cash is still what we want to do. The other lever that I would suggest that we look at several years in the future would be as we get through this, we have the reserves that we're going to set aside. And then we have that underlying commitment of 50 million in non-reserved cash. So if and when the reserve for the 90 days worth of operations gets high enough or too high to be palatable for our organization, that we look at that in conjunction with that $50 million of unreserved cash and figure out how to equalize some of those constraints.
So it was really the unrestricted cash, that extra 50 million that is, part of the pillar requirements. And in my mind anyway, what drove our wanting or our request to see a policy statement from the board on it. There's no mention here about the 50 million unrestricted cash reserves that I saw.
Because technically, sorry, Matt, technically a reserve by definition is restricted. The $50 million cash balance is not a reserve. It is a cash requirement. So it would not be included in a reserve policy, but we could certainly, as we operationalize, if we agree that this is the path that we want to go down and we do a reserve policy with the board, the next step would be to operationalize that with an administrative procedure that would help monitor that and give us the steps that would need to be taken if something did, we could not meet these reserves. And that is where I would put the $50 million of cash requirement would be in the operational administrative procedure. So that gives us a little bit more flexibility. And that's where I believe that it belongs, because it's not technically a reserve, because we are not putting it, if you will, in a lockbox. That's what a reserve designation actually does.
I'm wondering, has anybody taken or had the nerve to say to a lending institution, yeah, we'd like you to supply us the money, but we're not going to put any 6 months worth of reserve aside to pay it, since we're at 1.2 or now 1.3. Is there any desire to do that, or you're perfectly comfortable with how it's been set up in the past? You're not willing to rock the boat, so to speak.
I don't believe we have the opportunity to rock the boat. We are going to lending agencies asking to borrow money. These are the requirements that they put around us borrowing that cash. The selling of the debt has certain restrictions. As part of their duty as our financial advisor and our bond counsel, they work with us and those lending institutions and the brokers to make sure that we get the best deal possible. And I don't believe that anybody would be willing to loan us money, Eric, if we came with that request.
The challenge for me is I just come from a simpler life, and I just kind of look at it and try to work through some of that. Thank you very much.
Sure. So moving on to the policy side, if there's no more questions, the policy is to maintain the cash reserves, to maintain the $20 million for the emergency, the 90 days of operations, as well as the required debt reserves. Now, we put in here this next piece, in case of emergencies that cannot be covered by capital or reductions in operating expenses, the department will submit a request for the emergency reserve funds to the advisory committee. The committee will review and recommend a request to the county administrator, who will review and provide to the Board of Supervisors for consideration. That mirrors in practice how we would access the general fund reserves. It is the Board of Supervisors policy, so it is the Board of Supervisors that would allow for the use of these reserves. So how do you feel about those requirements? Jackson and finance get together. We determine that it is a true emergency, that he needs, $5 million to do this. There's no place that he can realistically cut, either out of his CIP or his operations. We all are in agreement to that. We give it to you guys to say, okay, we believe that we have had an actual emergency. We believe that we cannot cover it out of operations or CIP. We would like to request the board allow us to tap into the $20 million reserve. You give your consent, or we have those discussions. You give your consent. We then take that and go to county admin, and it becomes a board agenda item where we discuss at the board meeting if the county administrator moves it to forward. So that would be the process that we would actually use. Comments?
So that would be the process to be followed, whether it's an emergency or some other non-emergency urgency, some reason that Jackson feels that it's an unusual cost that's been imposed on the department by circumstances, and although not perhaps an emergency like the Speedway sinkhole, it's an urgency for the department to continue business.
The way defined, Matt, is emergency. This
Yes.
is the way this is currently structured, is the word emergency. So not, an urgent need, it's an emergency.
And so for the 20 million emergency reserve, I would agree with that. For the 25 million operating reserve, I would think that we'd want to give the department a little more flexibility and ability to access that money whenever there's an appropriate need.
I would disagree with that, but Jackson, what are your feelings on that?
Yeah, I mean, I look at the whole big picture, and I just look at the 100+ million that we have in cash reserves or in cash and in the reserve account. And I think we cleared up the 20,000 or 20 million emergency that, yeah, when it's an emergency, we go tell the board, here's what we think, and I'm good with that. But, then the next question is, as Matt brought up, is what is the 90-day of operating expenses? How and when would you ever use it? Or is it just a fictitious account that'll just sit there forever? And things that can or would or do happen, I think you need to be able to access it if we're going to call it. It's a reserve account for those purposes. So I think there needs to be some clarification on that account.
Okay, so in answer to your question, it is not a fictitious account. It is an actual cash bank account that has reserves in it, actual cash money set aside to ensure the stability of the organization. If everything went to hell in a handbasket and for whatever reason we could not collect revenues or we could not collect a substantial amount of revenues, that would be an emergency. And we would be able to go against, through this policy, any of the funds that are in the reserve account. I would strongly oppose any of this urgent, something came up use of these reserves. One of the reasons that, we have a very strong department financial position is because we manage the budget and the creation of the budget, both the operating budget and the capital budget. And we look to that budget first for things that happen that are unusual. And all of us know in our own lives, things happened that we need to deal with. And do you always go to your 401k when something bad happens? No, you don't. You go to your operating expenses first, your various funds that you have access to, ready cash. And you find out, if I have to have a $5,000 transmission repair on my car, how am I going to pay for that? Am I going to use a credit card? Am I going to go to a bank account? Am I going to do a savings account? I'm not going to tap my 401k for a car. Now, if I have, a flood and I lose the roof on my house all at the same time, and it's happened, to the county and the insurance companies aren't paying us, then yes, maybe we would tap into something like that. But I think that we really need to pay attention to what is the purpose of a budget and the various buckets we have in a budget, and understanding that those budget dollars should be moved around first for things that are unexpected. True emergencies, you go to hit those reserves. That's my philosophy at any rate.
So essentially, the $20 million emergency reserve fund has become a $45 million emergency reserve fund as far as the practicality of utilizing it or accessing it goes.
The way this is set up is that if there is a true emergency that has been defined as we can't make it up out of operations or CIP, the department and finance agree that this is, we do not have the wherewithal to deal with it. It comes to you. Say it's a $25 million, problem. We would tap into the two reserves that we have, the one that is set aside as at 20 million and the other that is the 90 days. We have broken those into buckets so that one is a flat dollar amount that isn't changing, and the other one floats with your operational costs. It's entirely possible that if you would like to, we could set a different thing and say we want to have a $45 million reserve, restricted cash. Don't break it between operating reserves and a capital, an emergency fund. What we are trying, because those were set up at different points across time, we could in fact make that a recommendation that we combine those into one reserve. If we did that, it would also be my recommendation that that reserve dollar amount is looked at a minimum on a biannual basis to determine if it needs to go up. And what I would then do is, instead of saying it's 45 million, I would set it as a percentage threshold of operational costs. So if your question is, do we have two buckets? The way I've set it up now, we do. Could you tap into both of those buckets through the emergency process? Absolutely.
So then the 50 million cash that's not technically a reserve, that is available for discretionary use by Jackson at any time, or does he have hoops to jump through to be able to utilize that in, you know, what I've described as an urgency condition?
I think Jackson will tell you that I always have hoops for him to jump through. So the hoops that you are talking about, having a departmental fund balance, the first place we go is you have costs that you need to spend. You say you can't live within your budget. That's the first question that everybody asks. I can't live within my budget. We talk about that. Now, remember, in the case of wastewater, we have two separate budgets that are very large. We have his operational budget and we have his capital budget. We can move budget authority between the capital budget to the operations budget to the capital budget. We have done that in the past when there have been issues or needs. So that's the first thing, is when there is this unexpected issue, not emergency. We're on unexpected at this point. It was not something that was contemplating in the budget. The first question is there something in the budget that I can do some savings on? Can I push this cost, this expense out to a future year? Can I shave a little bit here? Can I slow down a capital project and use that, or has a capital project slowed down on its own and I have capacity within the capital budget that I could use to move over to operations to cover that unexpected need? The first place everyone needs to look is those two budgets. If it becomes you can't live within the various budgets that you have, your next option is to be able to use fund balance, which is technically where that $50 million resides, in liquid cash. The process to do that is unexpected use of contingency, because that's what it would be, budget contingency. I have the authority to approve up to $50,000. Jan has the authority to approve up to $500,000. Anything more than $500,000 goes to the Board of Supervisors. That is already a policy that exists. So that avenue for smaller, unexpected, urgent changes already exists.
And so the process for a multi-million-dollar project or a multi-million-dollar expense would be basically the same as the process in this policy. Go to the board and get approval, right?
Correct, but it would not necessarily come through the RWRAC committee. If Jackson had identified some urgent or unexpected activity that did not meet the definition of an emergency, it would go up through the normal chain of county process. Jackson Finance, we go to Carmine, Jan, and then the board. Kind of a routine process.
So a little bit more efficient than the process that's outlined here for the strict emergency requirement.
Did that because it seemed to me in our discussions that you all wanted to be involved in the, for lack of a better word, the declaration of an emergency, because it was going to be a significant amount of money. It wasn't going to be, $1 million or maybe even $2 million. It was going to be much larger than that. Like the sinkhole.
Yeah, I don't know if that was our desire or intent or not. My own interest in this has been not so much these reserves, but the $50 million cash contingency balance or whatever it is that we thought was a reserve. And it's the management, it's the requirement for that $50 million excess and the management of it that mostly concerned me insofar as its status as a financial pillar for the wastewater department.
Now,
So go ahead.
sorry, if
No.
you'll recall, as part of that white paper that we talked about, that is one of those recommendations that is coming from the financial advisor as well as the rating agencies. They are looking for that level of liquidity. And I believe that we shared with you that there are other organizations that have a greater degree of liquidity, and that was the amount that they were expecting for us, given our size, given our debt profile, that we should have. If you would like me to change the process so that it doesn't come to the committee and it just is the department submits a request for the emergency reserves for the use of those monies to the county administrator, I'm happy to make that edit as well. This was what I had understood, and if I was not paying attention, or if I misheard or assumed something that wasn't stated, happy to change that.
Well, I guess my personal preference would be to make this more efficient in an emergency situation. And I think that if this sort of thing was happening, our committee would be aware of it immediately and be able to weigh into the board. But my own view is that it's not a separate wicket or hoop that y'all ought to have to jump through.
Ellen, this is Jackson. I did ask that previously that, it seems like an emergency, you don't want to add bureaucracy and have the RWRAC have to chime in. If it's timely and they're aware of it, that's great. And they're always welcome to tell the board whatever they want to tell them. But we need to be able to move in an emergency, and we don't want to add steps of bureaucracy.
Not a problem. Happy to take it out.
That sounds like a motion. I saw Claire do a thumbs up, as did I. So you can record that the committee that is in attendance right now is in agreement on that, it sounds like.
The language that I will use will be something similar to this, although somebody else will wordsmith it in a much better way, is the department will submit a request for for use of the emergency reserve, and board policy XYZ use of contingency will be followed. So it will reference back to the board policy, which means it just, those levels. And since we're talking emergency, we'll definitely be going to the board, and we'll just include that there. And that will streamline that tremendously.
Okay. Eric.
Yeah, I'm confused a little bit, but I think I'm going to walk it through. I'm coming from a perspective that we actually have, and I'm going to use this up very loosely, Ellen. We have 4 emergency funds. Oh, shoot, there goes the phone and I can't get to it. Okay. The challenge is we have a budget. Should an emergency come up or a needed expense come up, then we can float money around within the budget, whether it's capital budget or the operating budget, move money back and forth to cover it. That's one reserve. The second step is we have a $50 million cash hold over there of money that should we need it, we can dip into that. If we go beyond that, we then have the operating reserve, a 90-day amount, which right now is calculated at about 25 million. And then if that isn't good enough, we have a $20 million reserve. Now, it sounds to me like we got a lot more reserves than we really need. That having all of this reserves makes it very difficult for me to stand there and talk to a customer of ours and say, hey, yeah, we're going to raise your rates. Yeah, but you got $100 million sitting over here. Why are you raising my rates? And I can't justify that in my mind. That's personal. That's me. I think that the cash held in a $50 million pocket, I think that can be reduced. You've got 45 million right now, 25, that'll give you $70 million. I mean, I'd go to anybody and say, hey, why isn't this good enough? And explain it to me, because I don't understand it. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm a little dense.
That's okay. I look at it slightly differently. I hear what you're saying. You live within your budget first, absolutely. You want the use of contingency, which is access to that $50 million. That would be lower level, urgent, unexpected, that you can't live within your budget.
Ellen?
Yeah.
I look at that as what happened a year ago when the county did their salary survey and they came up and they made a whole bunch of adjustments in salary and everything and pay. And that cost the department about $1.5 million. That's, in my mind, that was covered by the budget. And then if it couldn't been, it would have been pulled a little from those cash reserves.
You are correct. That is exactly what we did.
And that I'm fine with. I can understand that very easily. I just look at having 50 million sitting over here with another 45 in another pot. It just seems to me we've got plenty. Let's take another look at it. That's all.
I missed something. Can you say it again?
Claire, I see your hand.
Yeah, I love hearing everybody's perspectives and stuff, but if it'd be possible to move through the agenda a little more swiftly, it'd be great. And I just don't know. I'm sitting here and I don't have a lot to comment on some of these things. I'm wondering if we could get to the core of what we really need to address as a team. That would be very helpful.
So for this meeting, what we really need to address as a team is the $50 million cash reserve pillar. Is that something that we as a subcommittee believe is required for the department's operation and for consideration in rate setting? So, I mean, the discussion has been a little bit, or misoriented towards the emergency reserve policy. But that kind of, as Eric has observed, is an underpinning to the unrestricted cash reserve. But I guess I would entertain any comments about the appropriateness of the $50 million cash reserve requirement.
That, do you mean the 50 million unrestricted cash? Because it's
Yes.
not, reserve is the key word there. It's not a reserve.
Yes, the unrestricted cash balance excess cash requirement is what we have been calling, and I think the pillars call, a $50 million unrestricted cash reserve. I mean, that's why we're having these meetings, is to discuss the pillars. That was the next pillar in order. So is $50 million the right number for that sort of money, or can we do with less than that? Say, instead of 50 million, the operating reserve is at 25 million, perhaps another 25 million would be satisfactory, and also be something that the rating agencies would buy into. Kirsten.
Just a quick question. So to follow on with that, just help me with the thought experiment. If we lowered that 50 million unrestricted, what's the alternative? What are we doing with that money? Does that become CIP money? Does it just downgrade one level to become operating and CIP money that would be even more freely moved around? Is that the alternative we're talking about? Help me understand what are we saying if we're doing away with that? What does that money become?
It would become one or the other, I guess.
Or it pays down debt? Is that what I heard Jackson say?
Well, but we're using it to pay down debt, or at least a portion of it. So it all works together, and I think we have to have an understanding of how that works. Eric, did you have a comment to Kirsten's point, or should we ask Ellen to weigh in?
No, my comment to Kirsten, and I appreciate what you're saying, Kirsten, is what would it be used for? One of the thoughts in my mind was we wouldn't do it radically. In other words, in 1 year, maybe we do it over a 5-year period, 10 million, 2 million, 2.5 million, or $4 million a year is set aside. That it could be used to pay down debt. It could maintain the service rate that what we have currently, not have to raise rates currently in the coming year. It could be used in a variety of ways. If there was a specialty project that was coming up, maybe those funds could be put into the capital improvement for a specialty project that needed to be done. I think that can be discussed. I think there are a number of things we can do, but I appreciate the comment, Kirsten.
Ellen, turning to you for potential answers.
So as we have discussed, the $50 million reserve or cash requirement, the $50 million requirement is being imposed on us by the rating agencies. They're the ones that are suggesting that. That is the bond council and our financial advisors that are telling us that that is a requirement to maintain our current debt ratings. If we would talk about reducing that, I believe that we should have RBC in this conversation so that they can tell you what impact that would have on your interest rate, on the debt, and our ability to borrow money.
Yeah. So, oops, raise my hand.
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah. So the thing I want to avoid is armchair financial advisement. Like, I really feel that we have professionals here that have spent a lot of time looking at this, and they're making their best recommendations and that I am comfortable doing what they've done before. Now, I also think it's great for us to question. I'm happy that we've taken the contradictions out of our documents. But as far as this $50 million goes, I'm not comfortable changing that unless we have professionals at Wastewater that feel that that would be best for the agency. That's just how I feel. I don't feel that I have the competency to question that. Maybe others on the committee do, but I certainly don't. So I'm not comfortable making that choice. That's how I feel.
Thank you. Well, and I guess there's perhaps a balance between armchair financial advising and rubber stamping. And our committee and subcommittee have a role. And I don't think it's either to rubber stamp or necessarily to second guess, but to understand and advise. And I think that, there's something more to what we should do rather than simply accepting what the county departments are recommending. We certainly can satisfy ourselves that what is being recommended is valid and we should support it, move forward. But I think doing our job requires some asking questions, some discussion and some understanding to help us do what's expected of us.
And to summarize, what I think I'm understanding Ellen saying is that cash reserve gives us the credit rating that we get, because that credit rating then gets applied to future debt. We need the credit rating to get future debt at the levels that we're allowed to borrow money, the lower levels. So that also affects ratepayers. If we let go of $50 million, don't have it, our credit rating goes down, we borrow, and now we're borrowing and paying more interest to borrow. So to me, it sounds like a wash. To me, it sounds like I don't see a reason not to protect our credit rating in order to do the pay-go that we successfully do in the 10 to 15 years that we do it. And just as a wastewater professional, rates are going to get raised one way or another. That's just where we're going to end up going. We've protected that for a good long time, and this 50 million isn't going to keep us from that. I don't know, I'm sort of armchair summarizing what I think I'm hearing, but I think that's evolving to be my position, that I'm kind of with Claire Zucker. I'm not in a position to really say, let's let go of this 50 million in a hurry.
Yeah, and I certainly am not either. The offer again, Ellen, of having RBC address these issues to the full committee, from my standpoint, would be welcome. Anticipating and I guess going back a few meetings of this committee and with the white paper, I've not gotten my comfort level to where I hoped it would be after seeing the policy written and having these discussions on it. I had hoped for something more definitive and clearly justified before we handed the ball over to the full committee next month. But I don't think that's going to happen to the level that I would be comfortable with. So I'm anticipating full discussion at the committee, the full committee, on the issue of the financial plan and rates. And I think it would be good to have RBC on hand, if that's possible, for maybe a couple meetings of the committee coming up.
So we're talking about the RWAC committee, the whole, not the subcommittee?
Yes, I think it's probably time for the whole committee to talk about this probably without us having to go talk about it any further, because I'm detecting Claire and Kirsten are pretty comfortable with where the finance department is leading us. Eric and I less comfortable, and I don't know that we're going to productively come up with anything for the full committee as a result. And knowing that we're getting close to Claire's departure point, we still have to talk about the rate increase proposed schedule, which I think is probably a good thing for us to address during this meeting. And so I
Just a
unless
moment, Matt. Ed has Art would like to speak.
Yep, sure. I think we're close to finishing the discussion on the cash reserve policy and the pillars in whole. And Art, yes, please weigh in.
Yeah, I just want to ask a clarifying question if I could, Mr. Chair. And that really is what specifically, just so that, because I'm very likely going to have to be the one to bring this back, not knowing when the meetings are scheduled for the full committee. What specifically are the concerns from you and Mr. Solwold that I can, over the next however many days, work to address? I just want to be clear that I'm understanding them.
Sure. I guess I could direct your attention to the minutes of this subcommittee from last month. There's pretty good discussion in there about some inconsistencies and uncertainties between the two rating agency reports. Some questions that I had that were going to be researched and responded to. And then those same minutes will give you, I think, a good idea of Eric's concerns as well, because they were patterned around questions that he had. And then beyond that, I think it's hard to anticipate from the full committee what to expect. But again, maybe going back a couple more meetings of this subcommittee and looking at those minutes. As I indicated, Jeanette has done a tremendous job in capturing the discussions and the salient issues, and it will just, I think, give you a little better sense of some of the issues and concerns related to the four pillars.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I don't want to cannibalize any more of your time. I know you've got a short window, so thank you so much.
Sure. One other thing, Ellen. So when you present the policy that we've been talking about somewhat to the board, will you give them additional background or some explanation and discussion as what all this is all about and why? So, I mean, I'd be interested in seeing that sort of narrative. It would, help. Obviously, the intent that you'll have in developing that will be to convince the board to approve your policy. I'd like to be convinced to approve your policy too. And
Well, the the first step, Matt, was you guys had requested, instead of doing it as operational guidance, to create something that was more formalized. So the draft policy was created. The process to get a new Board of Supervisors policy is it's multi-stepped, as is in everything with the county. So we draft something, we work with the departments that are affected, which is what we're doing right here. I would then pass it through legal as well as through county administration so that they could have their commentary on it. And then we would draft a memorandum that would go to the board as a board agenda item saying, you know, this is the history. This is how we've been dealing with this. What we would like to do is codify these reserve processes into a board policy.
Yeah, but I guess that's where I would see us getting involved, would be on its way to the board. And, you know, I don't think we were pushing for a policy on restricted cash reserves. I think we were interested in policy statements on reserve accounts in general, primarily the $50 million cash contingency balance that's not really a reserve. So maybe the need for all this is not as significant as
I think I
originally
disagree
thought.
a little bit. I mean, I very distinctly remember us saying, hey, we also want to know, how would Jackson ever access the money in an emergency? We did ask
Yeah.
that of Ellen last time. So it's not just the 50 million. It was also, how would he go about
But
getting
I don't know that
that?
he was asking about accessing the 45 million restricted. I think he was asking about,
He was asking, I'm sorry, Matt,
asking.
he was asking about how he gets his hands on that 20 million.
Yes, he was. And then I was backing that.
And I
in our
just want
last
to
meeting.
say, this process
Just what's the process?
has helped me because we are in the process of developing another one for the library district, who also has some significant fund balance and cash. And they have asked for the same kind of codification, if you will, formalization of this process. So this has actually been very helpful to me going through this with you all to help apply it to other places within the county. So I want to, as much as you may or may not think I have enjoyed this process, it has proven to be very beneficial for the county as a whole. And that is always my first hat that I wear, is what is the best thing for the county. So thank you for that. Putting together the white paper, putting together a new board policy that follows along the lines of our general fund reserve policy, which we created a couple of years ago, I think is a very good financial step forward. Putting these things in writing and making them formalized helps all of us understand where the walls are and what hoops of fire we need to jump through. And it helps us understand and how we can access all of those funds. So just from my perspective, it's been a piece of work, but thank you.
And I thank you, Ellen, because I'm a new member of this committee, and it's helped me understand how this all works, being part of the process of seeing it put down in writing. We may not, the four of us all, agree on the fact that these policies are the way they maybe are being explained by Ellen. We can debate that at another time, but at least they're in writing so we understand what it is we're debating.
Yeah, I don't want to be the total naysayer. I have also felt that this has been a good process. I just feel that we also need to, when we're talking about whether we move money out of funds, we need to think very carefully about whether that is a recommendation of the department. I think the process information has been very useful and will be good for the whole committee. And I think, to some degree, as much as we're going to share or you're going to share. So I certainly do appreciate the whole process discussion.
Thank you, Ellen. I know you only got 6 weeks left, so just hear us. Thank you very much for doing this.
Like I said, it has proven to be very helpful to me in other areas. So it's been a good exercise.
Hey, Matt, I have something to say when you can call on me.
Yes, I'm calling on you, Jackson. You can either talk about your access to whatever reserve funds you want to, or you can talk about the rate increase proposed schedule of activities and events, the next agenda item.
Actually, I wanted to talk quickly about both of them and give you some perspective. And, so I already brought up that I do not wish, just so it's in the minutes, that we do not require RWRAC to bless the emergency reserve use as we formalize the process to use it, just to save the bureaucratic step. They can chime in anytime they're aware and need to, but not as an approver in the process, as all they are is a recommendation anyway. But the other item that I wanted to make sure I chimed in on was the one that says, if you use the emergency reserve, you must pay it back within 2 years. And I didn't personally like tying our hands unnecessarily or putting in criteria that, of course, we're going to pay it back as soon as possible, whenever our financial situation allows us to pay that money. And if it's in 2 months or 6 months or a year or 5 years, it is what it is. And I just don't like putting those additional limitations that don't, in my opinion, serve any value, because we're going to make the right decision because we require those reserves. We're going to fill them back up as quickly as possible. So my recommendation is to remove that 2-year requirement from the language. That was one. And then if you guys want to comment on that, great. But then I'll talk about the rate increase schedule I need to share something with you on.
Ellen, are you able to show us where he's seeing that in the
Yes,
document? Just to make sure I'm on the same page as his comment.
it's right here by the boat, when the board approves their use of the cash for either
Oh, okay.
reserve, unaccountable budget shortfalls, any action must provide a plan to restore the cash reserves to the minimum required balance within a number of years. So while I hear Jackson, and I know that our practice would be to refill the reserves as quickly as possible, one of the best practices related to financial policies like this is to actually put limits in, to say that they will be paid back within. And if 2 years is not enough, I would be happy to change it to 3, but I don't think that it should be much longer than that, because that one of the issues when you use those reserves, depending on the timing of things, is if you have a hole in your reserves, you're going to have to raise rates in order to fill that bucket back up. So I would like to keep a timely requirement in there. I am good with 3 years because I think that that is reasonable, because Jackson is absolutely correct. As soon as he has 1 shekel that is not accounted for, I'll be taking it and moving it over to the reserve so that we fill it up as appropriately and as quickly as possible. But given the fact that if we're talking about these emergency use of reserves, we're talking $5, $10, $20 million, we need to put a time frame whereby we are going to expect to fill it in. We could also put in something that says, and if we can't make that timeline commitment, we would go back to the board and say, we didn't meet our deadline. We need another 2 years in order to accomplish that. It is I want to call it a financial best practice. Making sure that we have those, when you borrow money, you pay it back on a specific schedule. This is in effect borrowing against the reserves that we are required to have for various and sundry reasons, either because we've decided we need them or other people have said it's best practice for us to have them. That would be my argument for having a timely return of the reserve.
And I think I'd certainly push for the 3-year expansion and then inclusion of a term about going to the board if more time is needed. Kirsten?
That was going to be my comment. I like the 3 years, and I like the addition of a come back and get a second phase of the plan if we can't get it worked out. I wouldn't want to be in Jackson's shoes if we had a big sinkhole that used up his entire cash reserves and he couldn't get access to the money if he couldn't come up with a plan at that very moment while the sinkhole is out there to pay it back in 2 years.
Yeah.
I'd like to give him some flexibility to use the money, and then as things are no longer in that emergency knee-jerk reaction, come up with the plan. That definitely would work.
Ellen, do you have a recollection how long it took us to come up with the 20 million initially?
I do not. I do not.
Yeah, I don't
So
either.
I believe that
If I remember correctly, it was a 10 million initial. It later got bumped to 20 million, but it did take us a few years to get to the 10 million.
so I will make that edit, or actually I will have Michelle make the edit, to change it to 3 and to add a emergency hatch if we need to have more time to come back to the board.
So in that same subsection there, I assume that where that says the board can use the cash reserve for operating emergencies and unanticipated budget shortfalls, that means with regard to the wastewater department and the enterprise fund specifically, that the board would not be able to use that money for some general fund purpose.
The wastewater funds are restricted for use.
So just no question about that.
No question about that. If, however, the Board of Supervisors wanted to borrow money from wastewater, it would be done through a board action that would require a payback. It would be a loan agreement. Now, the board has borrowed from, I think we borrowed from wastewater a long time ago. And I think we've borrowed from risk management once or twice, very specific dollar amounts with very specific loan documents being brought to the board, being discussed at the board, and those paybacks with interest being accomplished. So I don't want to say that the board has never had the authority to use the wastewater funds, but if they have, it has been through a very structured borrowing scheme, which has always been paid back.
Isn't that by state statute? Because it's sewer user fees going to a utility, and so it has to stay for the utility serving the users that paid for it. Okay, I just want to make sure I had my understanding there.
By definition, wastewater funds are restricted, but the board controls all of everything within so the board sits as the board over the wastewater. It sits as the board over the county. So they could use that, but like I said, those are hoops of fire that they would have to go through.
Okay, Jackson, if you're still there, or Marla, if he's not, take us through the upcoming schedule.
So I'll let Jeanette and or Marla kind of cover that detail, but I just want to summarize it and tell you that the ship has left harbor. It's going to be tough to catch up to it. If we want to make a rate increase on July 1st, it's going to be very hard. We would be pushed to push this subcommittee and push the full committee to do all the things they need to do. And that would also assume that we would just do one public meeting. So my comment is, if you want to take, not feel pushed or rushed or pressured, that we might automatically expect that the rate increase will not be effective July 1, but some later date. And it could be between July 1 and January 1 of 26. And depends again on all the details of how quick we get what we need from finance, how many public hearings or meetings you want to hold as a committee. In the past, I think we've done 2 on a few occasions. Sometimes we've done 1, but all those things we can see in the timeline that Jeanette and Marla worked on. But I just want to tell you that July 1 is already probably not realistic. And I'll shut up there, but that's the summary.
Thanks, Jackson. We'll see you tomorrow.
10-4, thank you all.
Okay, I'll just kind of jump in and show you the schedules we've developed. I know we're running out of time, Claire, you probably need to leave. But as Jackson said, we did develop 2 different schedules to try to get, what steps need to be taken to get a rate increase processed. If we were gonna do a July 1st effective date for rate increases, we're gonna have to have this committee report to the full committee tomorrow and get an action on public meetings and support and everything. So just kind of briefly run through this. This schedule is showing things that have already taken place. So back in February, the full RAC committee voted to recommend the rate increase to the board based on the 1.75 rate increase over a 4-year, 1.75 over 4 years. And they did vote to support that for the department. And then the financial subcommittee wanted to kind of deep dive into the subjects and some of these other questions they had. So we're looking at, I'll go kind of jump to the back of the schedule. A rate increase, once it's approved by the board, there's a 30-day wait period before it can be put into effect. So if we wanted a rate increase to go into effect July 1st, it would actually have to be at the board at their May meeting, the last meeting in May, for them to make that decision. And that's before they even adopt the full budget for fiscal year 26. So this first schedule is kind of saying, okay, we're going to go to the May 20th board meeting to get an approval on the rate increase. And that takes us back to right now. And we'd have to have the full committee get your report on what you've discussed and what you would like to do, and have them start discussing public meetings, when they want to hold them and how many. So this timeline kind of explains, how quickly we'd have to put all that into motion. The second timeline that was shared with you, the rate increase is yet to be determined, but it would give this committee a little bit more time to bring their report forward to the full committee and let the full committee have discussions on what they would like to do as far as holding public meetings, when they'd like to hold them. We are talking about doing both rate increases for sewer user fees and connection fees. That's 2 different ordinances. So the department would be getting approval to change both ordinances and revise them in this time frame. So I know this is a quick overview of the schedules you've got, but we just wanted to kind of let you know that if we thought we were going to do a July 1st rate increase, that we got to do it like tomorrow. So I don't know that you as a committee would want to be fast tracked that much.
Is Ellen still with us?
Yes, I am. Sorry.
That's okay. I guess I'd be interested in your input on how urgent approval of an increase would be, and whether we could make things work with the view of the rate workbook that maybe you've got in mind at this point, whether it would work with a later effective date.
Oh, absolutely. Having the new rates go into effect in January would not be an issue. Michelle has been working on the rate workbook. I believe that she got either late last week or early this week revised CIP numbers from Pima and the department that she is layering in. Those revised numbers went down considerably. Some very large CIP projects that were in the out years were pushed out further, and that has limited the pressure on increasing the rates based on my very, very, very preliminary look at that. So I do not think that you need to present something tomorrow. I think that is that's just silly talk. I think that we need to take a look at the rate workbook and I don't know what the plan is for this committee to meet. I thought it was going to be a couple of times in January, but I'm not sure. But whenever that next meeting is scheduled, we certainly will have the rate workbook ready for a distribution and discussion.
Well, then I think that would be a good agenda topic for our next meeting, if we could do it in January before going to the full committee and do a preliminary review of the rate workbook. Kirsten, do you have a comment?
And Ellen, just to make sure I heard you say it, we would be fine going all the way through January of 2026. All right,
Yes,
just make sure that gets in our minutes. Okay.
We can, when we look at the rate workbook and determine the percentage increases that are going to be necessary, because I'm going to tell you, an increase will be necessary.
Yes.
It will be less than what we had talked about last year because of the change in the CIP program. That's what I've seen thus far.
Okay. So
go
ahead, Claire.
Well, I just feel like the more relaxed schedule is kind of obvious.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it just, I don't feel like we can rush this, and seems like a good suggestion. So can I make a motion in the group that we move to the second schedule? That we recommend that to the broader group.
I would second that, but I might modify it and say we move to the second schedule with a tentative idea of having a rate increase maybe by January of 2026.
Yeah, to
That sounds fine.
remove the TBD part of it and have a specific date would be good.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
So there's a motion, and I'm taking Kirsten as a friendly second with a modification. And
Ellen popped up though, so she might have a
further
comment before we
discussion,
vote.
including Ellen.
So I just wanted to make sure that I understood. We're talking about an effective date of a rate increase for the fall or January. I have absolutely no issues with that whatsoever. We still, however, need to get through the process so it is included in the 26 budget. So just a little nuance of the implementation, the effective date of the rate, and when the work still needs to be accomplished. So just to.
Good. So with that discussion, any further discussion?
Hold
If not,
on
all
just
in
a moment,
favor?
Matt.
So-
Wait, just a second.
Yep.
So I just want to clarify that the two schedules that you were sent, each was calculated with a specific Board of Supervisor meeting date and then working backwards. So if you want to utilize the schedule with an effective date of January 1st, that would be a completely brand new schedule. It would not be utilizing the second schedule that was forwarded.
See, I think
So-
that we still use that schedule, Jeanette, because we need to get it into the budget, which means it needs to go to the board in May. And we can have an effective date later in the year. But part of this process is getting it into the budget.
Which you need to do it by June to get it.
We need to get it into the recommended budget, which goes out end of April.
Oh,
And
okay,
all the-
recommended, yeah.
But all
Yeah.
the public meetings then are based on the effective date.
Correct.
Right.
Well,
Right.
I think that the public meetings are keyed to the board adopting the budget.
Oh, so
could be wrong.
you feel like all those public meetings happened before?
They need to happen in the spring while the board, we submit the department submits the request. We deal with the the recommended budget goes to the board in the end of April. The board adopts the budget tentatively in May. Having those public meetings while the board is having their ongoing discussions about the budget, that seems to be the appropriate nexus to me.
I see. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So according to this, you've got a first public meeting. Well, maybe some of these could be shifted a little bit. a public hearing in March. That makes sense to me. And maybe, and that one is happening a couple of weeks later. You might have the ability to do that even later than that, but I am not involved in all of the machinations that are necessary from the department end. That I'm just talking about from the budget perspective. If we want to do a rate increase, we need to calculate the revenue to go into the budget. The budget has to go to before the board April 28th, or that's when we send the recommended budget.
So we still
Well,
need to do those public hearings. They just can be in March.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we need to even make a choice or a decision on the schedule, other than to indicate kind of our consensus that the effective date doesn't need to be until January, and leave it to the two staffs to work out whatever appropriate schedule should be presented to either us or the full committee in January.
I'm thinking that what I'm hearing is that this is the schedule to make that happen, because we have to get it approved by the board. But you've got to get it before them on April to get it approved, so that Ellen and others can do the department budget based on having a rate increase at the half-year mark of January.
Right, but
They
we
need to
don't have
stand on that.
We don't have to have action tomorrow at the committee, and there's time for the staff to finalize the schedule to meet
this schedule.
the agreed date, and without us having to get into the weeds of determining the schedule right now. So I think I'd be comfortable tabling the motion until next month's meeting to come up with a schedule to be followed in the new year. Unless there's concern or.
What I'm hearing is that this is the schedule that we need to follow, or something similar to this, in order to get those
Right.
public hearings in. And if we as a committee don't come back and choose between these two and say, hey, we're headed to something that looks like this, maybe those dates are a little movable, but I think they've worked this out. Marla and others have worked this out, that this is,
Right.
It's going to look significantly like this.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree totally.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it would be good to have a decision made so that we can, we can,
Talk about it tomorrow even.
yeah.
Okay, so what do you want staff to present tomorrow?
I think the motion on the table is that we preliminarily adopt this TBD schedule.
We recommend it for
Yep.
consideration by the full group.
By the full group, knowing that the TBD date now is changed to, I don't know, January 1st or something of 2026, whatever we want to make it, January 15th, 2026, something.
Is that helpful, Ellen and Marla?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it gives you a little bit longer to talk to the full committee, but they would need to kind of adopt a meeting schedule for the public meetings by their January meeting date.
Okay, and do you have the
Mhm.
language you need for the current motion?
Should I remake the motion?
Yes, go
Yes,
with it.
please.
All right, so I would recommend, I move that we take the second timeline presented and forward it to the whole committee for consideration, with the change in the TBD date to now read January 15, 2026.
I will
Good for a
second that.
second? Okay, any further discussion? Not, all in favor of that motion, say aye or raise your hand. There we are. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Any future agenda items beyond the focus or review of the rate workbook?
Wait a second, Matt, you skipped, meeting schedule, item number D.
Well, I guess I kind of am putting those together, figuring out what we need to talk about and then when. But we would have one item at least of the review of the proposed rate workbook. Is there anything else that anyone feels a need to discuss? Is that a hand, Eric?
I was just gonna, are we gonna continue further discussion on the cash balance reserve, contingency fund?
We can if there's merit to it. Otherwise, I guess my thought would be that becomes an item of discussion at full committee meetings down the road.
Okay,
Because it's something that really everybody has an interest of understanding and weighing into. Anything else for potential agenda item for early January, sometime before the full committee meeting that month?
Yeah, it sounds like it needs to be focused on what we need to do for this rate increase. What does
Yep.
our committee owe the larger committee? What's our schedule? What are the topics? What do we need to do to help us all get there?
Yes, and I think the best thing we can do at this point is look into the rate workbook and analyze the numbers.
Okay. And do we need to do something, Marla, with this schedule as well? Who's making the decisions on those dates is what I'm trying to get at, Matt.
Yeah.
If we say that they're rough, is it us that needs to fix that? Is that the larger RWRAC that needs to adopt those rates or dates? Yeah. Sorry.
I think that would be a good thing to take another look at in January for us to have perhaps a little tighter version of the schedule if that's something that happens. I mean,
can I ask this question?
Yeah, current
Jeanette,
schedule might
Jeanette,
be okay.
Yes,
we
ma'am.
have a financial report out tomorrow, right, from this committee to the RWRAC. So
Yes.
Matt's going to say, hey, we adopted this. This is preliminary. Matt, at that point, then can we ask for the rest of the committee to look at those dates and give any comment back on those dates? So then we would have something at our next financial committee. If they had big comments of concern or not, we could take that into account and then more or less help Marla finalize this.
Well,
schedule.
before I say anything, I'd like Marla.
Yeah.
She's got her hand up. Marla,
Please
go ahead.
do.
Yeah,
Help
and I
guide
was
us.
just going to say the dates, the public meeting dates contained in this schedule are certainly preliminary made up dates. We stuck them in there, but it's really up to the full committee as to when they want to do their public meetings, the dates, the times, the locations. That's all something the full committee would do, but we're suggesting if you want to, March is the month to do them in.
Okay, and
I
Kirsten-
just want to clarify as well that when I created the spreadsheet, you'll notice that the second column says timing.
Mhm.
And the last column says notes. The notes column tells you why a certain action is required or why the timeline is required. But the timing tells you kind of the minimum date based on the requirements of
Mhm.
your selected effective date, selected Board of Supervisor approval date. So if you have to have a certain action so many days before
Mhm.
that Board of Supervisor date, that action has to occur a minimum of Board of Supervisor date minus 60 days or however many days. So that's
Right.
kind of your last date to get certain things done. So I would suggest before you speak about this tomorrow, maybe review this, So you can see why those dates were selected and why we're recommending them, because we have criteria that have to be met based on the rules.
Yeah, no, I think your suggestion's good about seeking feedback, but Claire, it'll probably be, I mean, I can mention it during my report and then as long as you agree that that's something we want from the full committee.
Yep,
Okay,
Yeah,
sounds
I
great.
think that way we can solidify it. If we really think something needs to be changed, we'll have had their input. We can make those decisions at our next financial subcommittee and get a full recommendation.
yeah,
That sounds
Yeah.
perfect.
very good.
I have to go, you
Okay,
guys. I have a meeting, so sorry.
it's all right. We've still got a quorum. Thank you.
Yeah, all right. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
And brings us down to closing call to the audience. And there being none, I would accept a motion for adjournment.
Before we adjourn,
Yep,
Matt, I just say, Art, this is what you have to look forward to. And Kristen, go ahead and call for adjournment. I'll second it.
Okay, so moved.
okay, all in favor includes me. Thank you. And Art, this is one responsibility. I'm sorry, you just can't delegate. You got to be at all our meetings.
Happy to look forward to working with you all on it.
Yep.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank
you
Good
all.
job.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.